While it is well-traveled land, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. We are grateful to work, to learn, and to live in this area. Thank you, Prime Minister, for selecting our firm to design the new wampum belt for the Royal Proclamation 2021. We must recognize that the historical struggles experienced by Indigenous peoples, often due to the actions of the Canadian government, demonstrate the clear failures of Canada in the past. The relationship between our nations has been strained by disenfranchisement, degradation, and disempowerment of Indigenous peoples, almost always at the hands of the Canadian government. The new Royal Proclamation 2021 Wampum Belt, proposed here, is intended to signify the renewed relationship between Canada and Indigenous nations. The Wampum Belt reflects the Canadian government's commitment to rectifying the historical wrongs committed against Indigenous peoples and the harms flowing thereafter. Our firm is aware that the issues symbolized in this belt are not exhaustive. We hope the Wampum Belt will provide a first step in reconciliation and create a meaningful discourse surrounding this crucial topic. Please understand that this is only the beginning. This is not the start of an entirely new relationship, but it is building on the relationship of the past. We hope, though, it will signify a new era in the relationship between our nations, and as time goes on, seen as the first step in the right direction. This here is the wampum belt. As is demonstrated, both laid out flat from one end to the next, and its circular and symmetrical nature. The first concept I will discuss, outlined in the wampum belt, is the 4 lines. Between each set of individuals on the belt, there are 4 lines drawn. The number 4 is significant to the Indigenous cultures and represents many important concepts. The concepts discussed here are the 4 hills of life, the 4 seasons, and the 4 directions in the medicine wheel. These 4 lines are intended to represent different areas of Indigenous cultures and to create different interpretations and connections within the overall meaning of the wampum belt. The 4 lines were drawn to represent time, the 4 seasons, and the 4 hills of life. The intent is to signify the past and the future. This belt is not creating a new relationship. It is not forgetting and thereby ignoring the past. The past is not forgotten and forgiven. It should always be remembered. Facing the past and Canada's wrongs can be seen as one of the 4 hills that must be surmounted. It is Canada's responsibility to learn and grow from its past mistakes. It's not going to create this belt and then forget about it. As such, the lines represent the past and the future. In the context of the rest of the belt, this represents the failings of the past and the better terms that the future will encourage. Canada must learn from its experiences as one grows and learns as they progress through the 4 hills of life. The 4 lines are colored black, white, red, and yellow in reference to the medicine wheel. The medicine wheel represents many things, such as the 4 winds or the 4 directions. But to an Indigenous child, it often references the 4 gifts from the Creator. And in the context of this belt, the 4 areas in which Canada must make amends to Indigenous peoples. The physical branch of the wheel refers to the physical gift and physical health. Physical health is reflected by access to resources. Canada has harmed the physical health of Indigenous nations in the past through inadequate access to clean water, clearly demonstrated by the many boil water advisories which are experienced by Indigenous nations throughout Canada. The establishment of oil pipelines across Indigenous lands, which often leads to environmental degradation, and the inattention paid to this environmental degradation and environmental degradation in any other form. While these may only be some of the ways in which Canada has harmed the physical health of Indigenous nations, it is also some of the ways in which Canada commits to improving in the future. As the 4 lines stretch into the past, they also stretch in the future, and as they demonstrate the issues of the past, they also demonstrate the areas in which Canada will improve, will dedicate to reducing the damage done to the physical health of these nations. Now, the emotional branch refers to the emotional gift and the healthy relationships both between individuals and the environment. Canada has harmed the relationships of Indigenous peoples in the past by tearing people from their families to a step put them in residential schools and destroy the connections that they have, and the destruction of their environment through the approved use of such pesticides as DDT. Canada commits to doing what they can to rectifying these harms in the future, and in plans surrounding the reconciliation with Indigenous people. We understand that rarely is it that these damages can be entirely undone. There are in many cases they are permanent impacts of families that will be felt for generations more. However, this does not diminish the fact that Canada should commit to fixing the problems to the greatest extent that they can. The third branch is the mental gift and refers to the mental health of individuals, which is affected by access to education, language, culture, and Indigenous knowledge. This has been harmed in many ways. Indigenous peoples were banned from speaking their language by the Canadian government. They had limited their access to education and diminished Indigenous forms of knowledge. And when they did provide education, it was often subpar or in residential schools, which cannot be referred to as an education, more a re-education, attempted genocide against the culture of Indigenous peoples. This directs the Canadian government to aid in attempts to revitalize Indigenous languages, cultures, and methods of knowledge. This should be especially true in the academic circles, where Indigenous knowledges provide many areas which we can learn and improve our general knowledge, but at the moment where they do not receive a general level of respect from most academic peers. The fourth branch is spirituality, which represents Indigenous people's connection to the Creator. Their connection to the Creator was damaged when Canada banned Indigenous nations from practicing their religion, and it represents the need for Canada to make amends by encouraging, facilitating, and reinforcing the validity of Indigenous spirituality. It also asks to have the Charter be more reflective of the spiritual needs of Indigenous communities, especially when those needs and the spiritual traditions are tied to land. An example comes up of when the freedom to a religion of Indigenous people was sabotaged because the Great Bear Spirit had existed on a mountain, and that's where they always went to pray. Or, apologies, not pray, but demonstrate respect and give thanks to the Great Bear Spirit. However, the Canadian government expropriated the land and instead agreed to establish a snow hill for skiing that permanently chased away the Great Bear Spirit. These four lines, these four colors, represent the past flaws of the Canadian government and the future promises for reconciliation and any attempt to rectify past wrongs. This belt is symmetrical. Where it ends on one side, it continues on the other. This pairs with the four lines to represent the continuous nature of the relationship. It is never ending. These nations coexist together. When the belt is separated, it symbolizes how past wrongs sever the relationship. These breaks in the past, due to Canada's wrongdoing, demonstrates how the relationship is fragile. However, when it is brought together once more, the circular nature symbolizes how the relationship can continue again. While it is the responsibility of each actor to renew and to contribute to the maintenance of the relationship, Canada has a far greater burden due to the many harms they incited against the Indigenous peoples. As such, a greater responsibility for repairing the relationship and maintaining a more equitable relationship in the future lays on Canada. After all, this new agreement is not a static document. It needs to be lived.